Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight's webinar. I know it's been a while since we've done one, so it's good to be back doing this. We actually did a private pilot mock oral exam for the last one, but for that one, we had another CFI, Nate, act as a student. This time, a little bit different questions and scenario, but we actually have a student joining us, so thank you very much, Eben, for doing this. For those of you who do not know me, I am Wesley Chin. I'm a CFI at the Princeton Flying School. I've been teaching here for just about 2 years. I also did all my certificates and ratings at Princeton, and went out not flying, finishing up my last semester right now at Rutgers, majoring in finance and minoring in music. All right, well, Eben, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes. So
right.
my name's Euban. I'm a PhD student at Princeton, and behind me it's actually I'm setting up my lab. Yes, so I'm finished up by private pilots, and yeah.
Cool. All right. Busy man. All right. So for today, before we get into all the actual simulated oral exam, we'll just briefly talk about what the checkride actually is, and we'll go over the scenario that we're going to use. Then we'll go into the questioning. And at the end of all that, just have a couple additional tips and tricks to make sure you guys will really pass that checkride on the first try. So we hear this word checkride all the time. It's just another word for your practical test. So after you do all of your training with your instructor, you got all the solo time, night flying, instrument, all that other stuff, you've got to do this end of course final exam, if you want to call it like that, that practical test, right? Your CFI can't do it for you though. It's actually got to be conducted by an FAA designated pilot examiner. We're going to call that a DPE. And they test you based on certain standards, which we find in this document here called the Airman Certification Standards. So that's going to be something pretty important for you guys to be familiar with when you're preparing for your checkride, because it's going to list out every possible topic they can ask you about in the oral exam, and of course, all of the flight maneuvers that you're also going to do. So kind of the outline of what this practical test is going to look like. We split it into two different parts. So we have an oral exam, which is usually around 2 hours. You would break for a little bit, and then you would have a flight portion where you actually fly with the examiner for maybe about an hour and a half. Obviously, we're not going to do that here. We're just going to focus on the oral exam. But the first part of that is kind of a qualification phase. So essentially, the DP has to make sure you're actually eligible to take the test. So he's got to verify a bunch of different things. So for example, do you have the right number of hours? Do you have all the right logbook endorsements? Is your paperwork filled out properly? Do you have a current medical, student pod certificate, all these other things that the examiner will ask you for? After you determine that you're good to take the test, then you would actually start off with the oral questioning portion. And it's not going to really be like a written exam where it's just kind of you're memorizing answers word for word. That's not what this is about. It's a lot of scenario-based questions based on the stuff that you would see in the Airman Certification Standards, such as airworthiness. We talk about weather, airspace, different systems in your airplane, cross-country planning, to name a few. But after you do all that, we would go flying, right? You would do a bunch of takeoffs and landings, a bunch of different maneuvers. One important thing to note, though, technically, the oral exam never really ends because the DP can still continue questioning throughout the flight portion of your practical. So do expect maybe a couple of questions while you're flying. But of course, the majority of it is going to be on the ground. So at the end of the practical test, we have three outcomes. First thing is your temporary airman certificate, which you pass. Second is the notice of disapproval. Maybe if you messed up like seat turns, for example, or the oral didn't go too well, you have to come back to finish that up. And finally, we have the letter of discontinuance. So this is an option you can exercise at any time during the test. To kind of give some examples, a pretty common one is maybe you finish the oral portion, but then the weather doesn't look too good to go flying. Maybe it's a little too windy or the ceilings are getting too low, or maybe you're just not feeling too well, or you're just too tired. You can always ask the examiner to discontinue the test. You then have 60 days to come back with that examiner or somebody else and finish up the remaining portion. So how it works is before you actually arrive for the practical test on the day of, your examiner is going to give you some kind of flight planning scenario. He may just give you like a destination to plan to, or kind of even something more detailed. But you're going to be expected to complete VFR navigation logs and other performance calculations such as weight and balance or takeoff and landing distances. And all the oral exam questions and even the beginning of the flight portion is going to be based around that scenario. So So generally the oral exam, as we just talked about, is going to be about 2 hours, but we're not going to do that today. It's probably just be a little bit over an hour, if any. So we're just going to focus on the more important concepts, but I've also included a bunch of additional scenario-based questions so you guys can think about. But here's our scenario. So it's kind of similar to what we did last time. So this time, let's say we're going to plan a flight from Princeton to OXB, that's Ocean City, Maryland, and then we're going to take 298 Mike Charlie, which is a 172S model. Recently, that's been a popular checkride plane for some reason. Let's say that you, the applicant, are 170 pounds. You're going to bring along some friends for the trip that weigh 200 pounds and 180 pounds, and you're going to be in Ocean City for a few days. You guys, of course, want to hit the beach, check out all this other stuff around there. You're going to bring some baggage on board. So we have 50 pounds of additional luggage, and we're going to say plan for a departure time of 8 a.m. tomorrow, just something random. So what I've also done here is prepared nav log. We've got weight and balance and also takeoff and landing distances for this scenario. All right, so I'm going to send a PDF there in the chat. Hopefully that's going through. I'm also going to send an Excel file if you guys want to use that instead. Okay. Just want to make sure that go through for you guys.
Got it.
All right, awesome. So if you want to have that open during the mock world, definitely feel free to do that. All right, so let me get the screen shared again. So yeah, we have a nav log. We'll talk about some of the things we see on here. We're not going to spend like 30 minutes talking about every single little step though. We've got weight and balance calculations, and we've also got takeoff and landing distances. And of course, later on during the actual oral exam questioning, we will continue talking about all this stuff. But now that that's all done, on the actual oral exam, the DP is going to be pretty much required to say the test has now begun. So let's say that as well, and we will start off here. So here's our first question. Just want to make sure everything is all set. All good? All right, Evan. So before going on this flight today, what personal documents do you need to have with you to act as PIC?
Oh, I need 3 things. I need a pilot certificate, and I need a medical certificate, and also a government issued photo ID. Yeah,
you got it. That's exactly it. Pilot certificate, medical, and government issued photo ID. All right. Now, something important to understand here too, later on, when you get your license and everything, it's important to keep flying, but a lot of people don't do that. They just kind of work really hard to get their checkride and they kind of disappear. So what do you need to do if you want to still remain current as a private pilot?
Well, the biggest thing is biannual flight review. And I need additional qualification if I want to bring passengers.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. So we'll definitely get to that later. You're correct. The biggest thing is we need what's called a flight review every 24 calendar months if we want to act as PIC. Now, is there anything that can substitute getting a flight review?
Well, if I gain additional ratings or instrument or commercial that could act as a flight review. Also, there's FAST program, I think, on the FAA that could work once you finish the whole set, I think,
Okay, yeah, good answer there. So yeah, the biggest thing, right, if you get maybe your instrument rating, you pass a new checkride, that actually will reset the clock and you'll have an additional 2 years from that date. But yeah, the other thing, completion of a phase of, the wings program, essentially, what you just told me there, FAA safety, right? So it's a group of like online modules and flight activities. If you complete a whole phase of that, that can actually also count as a flight review. Good. All right, so we talked about this just a little before. So this scenario, right, we're going to be bringing some friends on this flight. Is there anything special we need to do in the airplane before carrying these passengers? And does it differ if it's carrying passengers in daytime or nighttime?
Yes. So once you have to bring passengers, you have to make 3 takeoffs and landings in daytime in the past 90 days if you want to take passengers in the daytime. Same rule works for the nighttime, but the landings has to be a full stop.
Okay, that's exactly it. Yeah. So in the last 90 days, we need 3 takeoffs and landings, but nighttime, right, that 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise, the main difference is it has to be to a full stop. All right, good. Now, let's say one of our friends that we're bringing along, they're being a little generous here. They want to help chip in for some of the rental fees since it's going to be a long trip. And he's telling us he can pay for 80% of it. Is that okay?
That is not okay. Private pilot can only ask passenger to pay no more than pro rata share of the operating costs of the aircraft.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, it's the pilot that has to pay at least, just as you said, your prorated shares. So in this case, we have there's 3 people on board, so you, the pilot, have to pay at least 33%, right? The passengers, they can kind of split it up how they want, but you have to pay your prorated share. Good. So these friends always flying with us, let's say, can they also help chip in for inspection costs when that time comes?
No, so as my previous answer indicates, it's only able to chip in the fair share for the operational cost. Through the maintenance and also the annual inspections.
Right, yeah. Essentially those non-fixed expenses, right? Rental fees, fuel and oil, stuff like that. All right, good. Now, let's say Princeton Flying School got a new airplane. They got a Piper Arrow. So a Piper Arrow is a complex airplane. What's a complex airplane?
So complex contains a constant speed propeller and a retractable and landing gear on top of that. I think it's flaps. Yeah,
exactly right. So yes, 3 things, right? We have the retractable landing gear, flaps, and constant speed prop. Now, is there anything special we would have to do before taking that airplane for this flight?
Well, I need to receive the corresponding ground training and flight training, and that will give me a endorsement to fly this type.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. So ground and flight instruction, and then you get a one-time logbook endorsement before you can act as PIC of the complex. So if you guys are studying for this, you probably will see in the oral exam guide or whatever you're looking at, there's a bunch of similar questions about like tailwheel airplanes or high performance, high altitude. It's all the same answer, right? You need ground and flight instruction and then that one-time endorsement. Very good. All right. What kind of medical certificate do you have and how long is it valid for at your age?
Okay, so for private, I know we only need a 3rd class medical certificate. And since I'm below maybe 40, that can last for 5 years.
Yeah, okay, that's right. So 3rd class, and the privileges are good for 60 calendar months if you're under 40. So yeah, the biggest thing with the medical, besides memorizing that, of course, is just understanding how the privileges downgrade, right? And let's say we move, you're changing addresses. How long do you have to notify the FAA by to continue exercising the privileges of your certificate?
30 days.
30 days, easy. All right. Sounds good. So we'll go into some airworthiness stuff. Now we'll talk a little bit about the airplane. So before we can fly, what required documents do we need on board the airplane?
So there's a acronym ARROW. I will use that. It's going to be aircraft registration, airworthiness certificate. And if I'm traveling internationally, there will be a radio license for both the aircraft and the pilot, hopefully.
That's right.
And there'll also be a weight and balance data and performance limitations. That's usually both sections can be found in the POH specific to the aircraft. There's also a compass plate that gives corrections for the compass reading, and a placard on the body or empennage of the aircraft.
All right, yeah, you answered all of them there. Very good. So, yeah, the main acronym that we can think about with the required documents on the airplane is ARROW. So you said that perfectly, right? And there's 2 other things that usually people don't think about. Yeah, so we have the compass deviation card, right? That's telling us, with the radio is on for 330, maybe we need to steer for 332, for example. And then, yeah, the external data plate that's outside. That's right. So essentially, you want to know where to locate each item in your airplane and know a little bit about each one. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but for example, understanding that the airworthiness certificate does not expire if you continue to maintain the airplane in airworthy condition. Registration does expire every 3 years. Radio station license, you actually nailed that. Yeah, the airplane needs it, but you yourself, the pilot, also need a radio telephone operator license to be able to legally, talk on the radio. And then you even told me the operating limitations, weight and balance data are also both found in the POH. Yeah, that's pretty solid there. Good. Often we'll have people confused though with this weight and balance data in ARROW. That's not the same thing as you doing weight and balance and bringing it in the airplane. The W in ARROW is basically saying you need to have a current copy of the weight and balance information for that airplane inside. All right, so we'll continue here. How about inspections, or you want to make sure your airplane's actually good to go? So what are the required inspections for your aircraft?
So the biggest one is the annual inspection every year. Can only be done with mechanic with an IA inspection authorization. And the other one is 100 hours, but that's only good for hire and for instruction aircrafts. And there's other inspections, including the pitot-static systems. VORs every 30 days, pitot-static is every year or every 2 years. I forgot that one. Both of them are only required for IFR rated aircrafts. And there's also EOT every 12 months, and also the transponder every 2 years.
Good. All right. Yeah. So you hit them.
And also,
you hit those there. Yeah.
Current would have to be current with all the airworthiness directives.
Okay. Airworthiness directives. Yeah, we'll talk about that too. Right. Yeah. So the another acronym. There's a lot of acronyms, all this stuff, right? So generally, we'll talk about aviate or aviated is our acronym, right? So yeah, annual, the VOR for IFR only, 100-hour inspection, just like you said, is for hire or flight instruction. We need the altimeter pitot-static system for IFR as well every 24 calendar months, and the transponder is also 24 calendar months. ELT, just like you said, we have to inspect that every 12 calendar months, and then airworthiness directives as well, right? So again, yeah, you want to know what each thing is checking, the dates associated with each one, right? But before you go for the oral exam, really make sure that you're spending time with your instructor, going through the maintenance logbooks for your specific airplane that you're taking. Because the examiner is going to expect you to show that the airplane's airworthy and show, all right, where's the annual inspection? Where's the 100-hour? Show me where this is being checked, when it was checked and when it's going to be next due. So that's going to be pretty important there, right? Also, you did a good job pointing out the main difference between the annual and the 100-hour, right, is the annual's got to be done by an A&P with an inspection authorization, right? So that means the annual can substitute the 100-hour, but not the other way around. All right, so do we need a working vertical speed indicator for our flight?
Okay, so I would say no. And
all right, yeah. How about
I do not remember the whole tomato flame acronym, but I do not recall there's a B in it.
That's a good point. There's no B in that. All right. Well, there's how about airspeed indicator? Bunch of A's.
My gut feeling tells me yes.
That's right. All right. Yeah. So we don't need the vertical speed, but we do need the airspeed indicator. Just said, yeah, that super long acronym everybody hates. A tomato flames, right? That's for day VFR flights. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff to memorize, but you have a FAR aim. You're going to bring that to the checkride, of course, too. So definitely tab those important regulations, and probably this is one of the most important ones to understand and tab. It's that 91205. So if you ever forget one of those, you can always open your FAR aim up, go to that regulation, and really figure out, is this specific instrument needed for my flight? So good. Let's say we're doing this flight at night, and we realize during the pre-flight we have a broken landing light. Can we go flying?
Yes, theoretically, you only need position light and anti-collision light at night. But, but landing light is only required for if I'm making this trip for hire.
All right, that's exactly right.
I don't want to go, but legally, yes. Right.
Yeah, you exactly said that there. So, oddly enough, yeah, the landing light is not required at night unless you are for hire for some reason. And I clearly remember that my DP asking me this question on my private check ride, and I was so confident saying that, no, we cannot go. But yeah, you got it. Yeah, we only need the landing light for a hire at nighttime, but I agree, probably not a good idea. All right, so yeah, some other things that we're not going to talk about too much, but know about preventative maintenance, right? Because you as a private pilot can also perform certain things. So you want to have that. It's part 43 tab, Appendix A, paragraph C. It's going to list, I think it's like 31 different things that actually count as preventive maintenance. Another big area that people get confused about is how to deal with inoperative equipment. That's 91213. So probably another good thing, and also a tab. There's a lot of good flow charts if you look that up online and kind of understand that. understand that if you ever see the word MEL, right, the minimum equipment list, we do not have that. It's not the same thing as the equipment list in your POH. So make sure you don't get confused between those two things. Excellent. So we'll move to some weather here. So what kind of weather could you expect in a low pressure system versus a high pressure system?
Okay, so low pressure system, think about as air being sucked in. As the air being sucked in, it forms more vertical motion. That means bad weather, you form clouds and showers. High pressure is usually the opposite, it means stable air and pretty good weather, basically.
Yeah, I think you got it there. It's a pretty basic concept. Low pressure, just like you said, is usually going to be bad flying weather, cloudiness and precipitation. High pressure, usually the opposite. Good. All right, so we're not going to go too much into weather theory, but let's say we did a briefing for this flight. So what weather sources do you use to obtain your briefings? And what are some other ways to also obtain briefings?
So there's, I have 4 flights, so that's the easiest way for me to get a briefing. There's also aviation weather.gov or something like that. And also the weather brief 1-800 number.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Those are probably your main sources right there. Back then, when we didn't have all these tools, we would call, right, 1-800-WX-BRIEF. You can talk to a person and get a briefing. It's also a website, 1-800-WXBRIEF.com, where you can file flight plans and same thing, get a briefing and even save it as a PDF, email it to yourself or whatever. But the main source of where it gets everything from is Aviation Weather Center. So every observation and forecast, you're going to find it on there. A really cool tool that I don't see too many people know about is the graphical area forecast tool, the GFA. So I definitely suggest checking that out if you don't know that already. And for flight, there's no problem using that. But just make sure you do get a full briefing and that you're not only checking the METAR or only checking the TAF. Because if you go to the flights tab, fill out the whole thing and make sure you press briefing, you get all the information you would get if you do a briefing on 1-800-WX-BRIEF or anywhere else. And ForeFlight will also log it that you did do a briefing. But, the FAA released an advisory circular, I think maybe last year. Not going to read the whole thing, but essentially they're encouraging us now to use these online automated weather resources to conduct self briefings before we even kind of think about contacting flight service, and only if we need to. All right, so we don't have a weather briefing prepared for today, which is okay, but expect some sort of, walkthrough of your weather briefing on your oral exam. So all these different things would appear possibly on your weather briefing. So maybe being aware of any TFRs along your route, and of course any NOTAMs, notices to airmen at your departure and destination airports, anything en route. And in terms of the weather stuff, airmets and sigmets. Know the 3 different types of airmets, convective sigmet versus sigmet, and the main difference between airmets and sigmets are important as well. Understand what PIREPs are, routine versus urgent. Know how to decode your METARs and TAFs, and all the charts that appear as well, because you'll see surface analysis charts. You'll have cloud coverage, visibility, and surface winds and precipitation. Another big one is winds and temperatures aloft, which you're going to be using a lot probably for your flight planning. So just know what you're seeing in your weather briefing. That's going to be pretty important, and be able to determine if you're going to go or not based on what you're seeing in that briefing. So what are some ways we can get weather information in flight? We just talked about all the stuff we do before, right? So what can we do in flight?
So I will go with the best technology one. That's we can get one of those ForeFlight Sentries or ADS-B receivers that can download in-flight weather, albeit they're not instantaneous, right? There's a small delay between the weather.
Good, yeah, it's good that you know that, right?
Or you have in your phone. But we can also call flight service stations or asking ATC if their workload permits.
All right, yeah, all good answers there. Anything else you can think about specific airports along the route?
Okay, so along the route, we can go through ATIS,
Yeah, okay.
control airport,
Right.
or AWAS, ASOS for those uncontrolled.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's one of the biggest ones. Exactly. So if you're going somewhere, if the airport has weather, you can pick it up via ATIS at a towered airport or AWAS and ASOS at a non-towered airport. Yeah, flight service station. That's not something I generally see people use too often, but they are an option. Some other functions of flight service station. They can process flight plans. They're there for search and rescue to initiate that. They can also take PIREPs. Right. We'll talk about later on how to reach a flight service station, but mainly, right, if you look at your chart supplement, you have frequencies for each airport. 122.2 is a generic frequency for it. But over certain VORs, you can also reach a flight service station. And yeah, you made a good point about that ADSV in weather, right? It's not in real time, especially, you want to be trying to dodge a thunderstorm cell using the radar that you see on that. And then, if air traffic control, if they're not too busy, they can also help us out. So some additional things to consider with the weather, right? This is just a lot of theory stuff. So fog, stable versus unstable air, icing and frost, thunderstorm formation, wind shear, all those are different things you want to be familiar with talking about in addition to different kinds of briefings, right? We have standard, outlook, and abbreviated. All right, so we'll go into a couple human factors here. So what's hypoxia? What do you know about that?
Hypoxia is a lack of oxygen in the blood.
Yeah, pretty basic, right? State of oxygen deficiency. Good. What are some symptoms of hypoxia? And then you notice that. How would you correct for it?
So I'm looking for usually drowsiness, dizziness. If it's really bad, you see your fingers turning to blue. Basically, when you don't feel well.
Yeah, that's definitely a good chunk of them there. So if you notice that in your passenger, or somehow you notice that for yourself, how would you correct for hypoxia?
Well, if there's oxygen, use it. If there's not, I will descend for altitude.
That's exactly it. Descend is probably the biggest answer, right? Because we probably don't have supplemental oxygen on board. Good. All right. Now, let's say when we were looking at our weather briefing, we saw some AirMet tangos. What are AirMet tangos? What does that tell us?
Tango is usually a turbulence AirMet.
Yeah, moderate turbulence. That's right. So let's say we're on this flight. One of our friends becomes airsick. What could we do to help him out?
Oh, a very limited way, but you can open the vent.
Mm-hmm.
And if all else fails, or you can try to up and down for the altitude if the weather permits to find a smoother air.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
But if all else fails, have Ziploc bag ready, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point there, realistically. So a lot of similar symptoms, but opening the air vents is important. You can always tell them to look outside at distant objects, loosen the clothing. But if it really is not getting better, you can always try to find some air, land the airplane if you really need to. But yeah, you said it's always a good idea to carry a bag. All right. And what do you assess? What do you use to assess your fitness to fly?
Okay, so there are a lot of acronyms for this. I think there's one that's I'm saying there's
that's right.
PAVE, P-A-V-E.
Yeah, PAVE more so risk management. We may talk about that later. But yeah, the main thing for assessing fitness for flight is I am safe. So yeah, tell me what you know about that.
Well, basically it runs through a check for your both physical and mental conditions. And basic means you are in good shape, you are well rested, and you have mentally prepared, you are mentally stable for the execution of the flight. I cannot remember all of that. I'm safe each stands for.
All good. Well, yeah, you hit the important points. Let's see. Anybody want to help me out for I am safe? See if we remember that. Can you guys unmute yourself? I'm not even sure if that's possible. Let's see. Maybe not. All right. Well, anyways, I am safe. So I is going to be for illness. We have medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotion, and also eating is another one that we consider there. So yeah, that's definitely a good one to know. All right. And some additional things to consider with human factors, right? VFR and IMC is probably a big topic they'll talk about. What are you going to do if you accidentally enter a cloud and you get disoriented? Standard rate of turn 180 should be your number one answer there. And if you do the same thing at night, right? If you enter a cloud at night, it's kind of hard to tell. So your strobe light's probably a dead giveaway. And the other big thing with human factors you mentioned before was PAVE, right? When you're talking about risk management and trying to identify risks during your pre-flight process, right? That's going to be pretty important. Awesome. So we'll go through some performance and limitations. So I'll ask you to walk me through your takeoff and landing distance calculations. So I know we prepared some of those earlier. So what I'll do is open that up on Excel. And can you guys see Excel open here with the two charts? All right. Awesome. So yeah, we have takeoff and landing distances both here at max gross weight taken directly from the POH, but we have some METARs, corresponding METARs on the bottom as well. But you want to give it a stab, you and kind of figure out how we got these numbers?
Yes. So give me 1 second to read through it.
No problem. Let me know if you need me to zoom in anywhere.
Okay. Did my lights just died on me? Pretty sure it did. Well, the lab thinks I'm not there, so I'm going to turn my lights off. Yes. So first of all, could you scroll down? Okay, so let's see them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, here's exactly. Yep, there's the METAR.
Let's see the METAR, because the first thing I see is the air temperature, and we really couldn't know without the METAR. So for the takeoff, well, we don't really, Princeton doesn't have a weather station, so we would use the Trenton one. So let's aim for 20 degrees. And pressure altitude. I need to brush up a little bit on the pressure altitude. Could you give me a hint?
Yeah, of course. So essentially, there's a formula you can use to determine the pressure altitude if you have the current altimeter setting. But for now, we're going to skip past that. We're going to say sea level because there's not really a huge difference here on the ground at Princeton.
Okay, so sea level. So we see sea level total. Row is going to be 995 feet, and they will take 1690 to clear the obstacle. But here's the thing, right? We see the METAR. There's also almost headwind 260 if we take it off our runway 28. At 9 knots, and we might need to adjust that. But with all of that, consider this is the best case scenario. So you never want to have a runway that's 1690 feet exactly long. So just give yourself some margin of errors and maybe even double it to make sure you have that enough wiggle room to perform the takeoff.
All right, yeah, that's a great explanation there, and that's exactly how you want to do it on your checkride. As long as you know what steps you're using and how to get it, and that's perfect. So you made some good points there. Understanding the notes. You definitely want to pay attention to the notes. It's very easy to, forget about that. Maybe if you're taking off at a field at a high elevation, you caught, we have 9 knots of headwinds. We actually have to decrease those distances we see for by 10%, right? We're not in grass runway though, so that doesn't apply to us there. So good catch on that. And yeah, definitely being conservative with safety margin because we're not test pilots. We don't have brand new perfect airplanes, right? So our numbers are not going to be exactly that. So if you want to double it, go ahead, maybe 60, 75%, whatever it is you got to do. Just understanding that these are just numbers in a book, right? They don't mean too much. But yeah, essentially the same thinking would apply for your landing distance. So we'll skip past that. But yeah, nice job of working through that. Very good. All right, we talked about all this. Oh, of course, make sure that, with the numbers that you calculate that you can take off and land on the runways that you plan to use for the flight. Now, kind of same thing. We'll walk ourselves through the weight and balance calculations, and after that, I want you to just tell me if we're in the envelope or not, and if you're going to take the flight. So let me open that up here. Weight and balance. All right. So yeah, I just basically took the table that we find in section 6 of the POH, put it in Excel. We have our loading graph, and then the envelope right here. So yeah, tell me, talking about how you did this.
All right. So first of all, we get the empty weight and the moment from the weight and balance sheet. That's part of the arrow, right? The W part.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, good job linking that back. That's totally correct.
All So then we refer to the rest of them with the diagram on the left side. On the left side.
Right, yeah.
And you figure out the weight and the corresponding moment. And you both add them up. Just keep the units constant, and you add them up and get the result.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's nothing crazy about the numbers or the math here, right? So we determined that our takeoff weight is going to be 2552.56 pounds, and the moment the moment index, I should say, is 115.444. So then we plotted it here on the envelopes. And so what do you see? What is this telling us?
So that's telling me, and if I remember correctly, the maximum takeoff weight is 2550 pounds. Right. So without looking at the chart, I know we are overweight. But
yeah, we're overweight.
Right. But if you forgot the numbers, we look at the chart, it's outside, just outside of the envelope of the normal category, and that means the aircraft, the weight and balance is not suited for the aircraft to fly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're not in the envelope. So I'm going to ask you this, and I think we'll all have the same answer for this, but would you go on this flight?
No.
All right, yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
Even though we are like 2 pounds overweight, but that's you are pretty much.
Yeah, if you're outside, right? The main something we can even consider, right? How would we reduce the load? Well, right now the way we have it planned is we have full fuel, and obviously a nice thing to have full fuel, but we don't need full fuel for this, so we could always reduce that. But yeah, good. All right, so we'll go back here. Okay, so yeah, our airplane's overweight. So how is that going to affect your airplane's performance? Like what certain things may you see happen?
Okay, so basically, in the general rule of thumb, I see a decrease in performance. And that means a longer takeoff roll, maybe a slower cruising speed at a given power, and a decreased rate of climb, and and a longer landing roll.
Yeah, those are probably the important ones there you can think about for sure. Even shorter range or lower maximum altitude, reduced maneuverability, and a higher stall speed as well, right? So good. Now let's kind of shift gears and talk about center of gravity, right? Because not just weight, it's also balance we have to think about. So what would happen if your airplane's center of gravity is too far forward?
So if it's too far forward, you have a nose down tendency and a general decrease in performance. But the plus side is it's very stable. It's more stable.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, right. It's more nose down tendency, so you have to pull back on the yoke more to take off and flare, for example. And it is more stable. What would happen to cruise speed and stall speed if I have a forward CG?
So, in agreement with the general decrease of performance, I think the cruise speed goes down and stall speed goes up.
Yeah, there you go. And too far aft would just be the opposite of what you just told me, right? So we would have a lower stall speed, a higher cruise speed, and less stable. The next thing I was going to ask, but I think we all know, which is more dangerous, would be the aft center of gravity, mainly because, again, it may be impossible to recover from a stall or spin. And I'm kind of connecting here. Let's say we're on final at Ocean City, but all of a sudden your controls feel super mushy. You hear a horn go off in the background. What's going on?
So that's about it. It means the aircraft is imminent to enter into a stall.
Okay, and then we're going to stall soon. How does an airplane stall?
So my airplane stalls. That means its angle of attack exceeded its critical angle of attack, and that usually is accompanied or determined by the air moving through the wing is no longer attached to the wing; it's separated from the wing.
Yeah, that's
so
exactly right.
Stop generating lift, and it just drops.
Right. Yeah. So theoretically, could I stall my airplane at 110 knots?
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah, you definitely can.
can happen at any airspeed regardless, right? Because it's angle of attack determined.
Right. It's all about exceeding angle of attack. Good. Okay. So, right. Yeah. Airplanes are stall. What are some other common situations where you may accidentally stall or even spin the airplane?
Right. So, I was in the pattern today. So I realized usually base to final, that's a very good opportunity for a stall, because you are approaching final, you are dropping your speed, you have your flaps up, flaps down, and if I overshoot the final, I have a tendency to overcorrect it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I become slip or slide, if I'm making an uncoordinated turn with a really sharp angle of turning, that means a high load factor, and that could result into a stall or even worse, a spin.
Yeah, you explained that pretty well. That's exactly right. The base to final turn is an important thing to think about, right? So what would you do then if you overshoot instead of trying to overcorrect like that? Well, what would you do if you overshoot final?
Well, if I have a long final, I can slowly get back to center line. But if I do overshoot and it's like I need beyond 30 degrees of bank to correct that, well, it's best to go around.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Good. Okay. Could you think of maybe one other scenario where you could possibly accidentally stall or spin the airplane?
Yes. So during the takeoff, that's because of ground effect. It seems that the aircraft performance is pretty good and it lifts off very easily. But as soon as you lift off, if you exit from that ground effect area and you don't gain enough airspeed, so suddenly the ground effect is gone and the aircraft stalls.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's why when we do a soft fuel takeoff, right, we keep it in ground effect. That's kind of how we apply that, because we know, as we know, in a soft fuel takeoff, the airplane becomes airborne not at 55, but well before that. And we don't want to just keep climbing out, because you're right, it's increased performance in ground effect. But the moment we get out of that, if you're still too slow, you definitely stall the airplane. So that's why we keep it in ground effect first, build some airspeed before we climb out of it. All right. And another one. A couple other things I have right here. Maybe if you're over rotating on takeoff or a go around, right? Maybe you have too much nose up trim, or you didn't anticipate the nose coming up too much, or the impossible turn. Maybe if you had an engine failure at like 600 feet after takeoff and you're trying to come back around, that's another good example if you try to stretch the glide. So we're not going to go over all these other things, but just, know your aerodynamic principles. So how does the airplane fly? You understand Bernoulli's principle, left turning tendencies, adverse yaw, load factor, density, altitude. All just basic things to understand. Know all your V speeds for the airplane, definitions and values, right? Where they are on the airspeed indicator and where to apply them, right? Just, don't just memorize, VX is whatever. When do we use VX, right? When do we use VA? All those different things. And definitely expect a conversation on spins. What is a spin and how do you recover from one? So you definitely want to know that acronym PAIR. All right, we're not going to talk about every system in the airplane, but let's see. Well, let's talk about the fuel system. So I have a super, super long answer that I got from that blue book, the ASA oral exam guide. I'm not going to read that word for word, but instead what we can do is just open up the POH, and I've just taken a screenshot of the diagram that we find for the fuel system. So do you want to try your best to kind of walk me through what you see here? So kind of talking about the fuel system.
Sure. Okay, let's start from the top. Cessna has 2 fuel tanks. Each one contains 26.5 gallons of usable fuel. And then it goes down to the selection valve, drain valve. And the fuel is usually provided by an engine-driven fuel pump. We do have an auxiliary fuel pump driven electrically in case, first of all, during the startup. And second, if there's an engine-driven pump failure, we can use the auxiliary pump. And we have a bunch of drain points, fuel sumps that's on the various positions indicated in this plot that we have to check prior to flight as part of our pre-flight inspection. And that's pretty much it. What else would you want me to ask?
Okay, let's see here. So we talked about, 2 fuel tanks, right? 1 in each wing, 26.5 usable, right? Do you know how much unusable fuel we have?
I believe it's 1.5 gallons from each tank.
Yeah, 1.5 in each tank, right? So there's a total 56 gallons and 3 unusable and 53 usable. Good. Okay. We can also see on top we have an electrical connection to the fuel quantity indicators in the airplane, right? We have those float type indicators on both tanks. We have the fuel caps we see. Do you see this vent here on the left tank? What's all that about?
Yes, so the fuel vent helps preventing creating a vacuum when the engine sucks in air, or when the engine sucks in fuel. If there's a vacuum, the atmospheric pressure will keep the fuel from flowing to the engine. So the vent is to do that.
Good. Yeah, that's the main reason. How come it's only on the left tank though? Right? We don't see it on the right side here.
Yeah, well, you see a really thin interconnect that connects those two tanks.
Yep, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, we have a line that interconnects both of them. Good. And we also see the drain valves on each tank, right? 5 total on each side, and we'll kind of walk through the other ones. But yeah, from the tanks, it'll go into our fuel selector, right? So we have 3 positions. We have left, right? We have both as well, right? Okay. So depending on what we have set, we'd be either drawing fuel out of both or maybe just one of these tanks. Now we also have a drain valve for the fuel selector, and that's right located under the counter. From there, the fuel passes into your fuel reservoir through the auxiliary fuel pump. Just like you said, if we need to use that to start the engine, right, or not start the engine, I should say, prime it up a little bit. We can also use that as a backup in case the engine-driven fuel pump fails in flight, right? Going through the fuel shutoff valve, right? So that fuel shutoff valve, why is that important?
So usually you turn off you pull the fuel shutoff off to shut off the fuel line. This is especially useful when the engine is on fire.
Right, exactly. So that kind of also brings up another point. Know your emergency procedures very well for your airplane, right? Anything that's bold-faced in the emergency procedures, your POH is actually memorized, right? So yeah, engine fire, you're right. Probably the number one thing you want to think of is pulling that fuel shutoff valve out. Good. And it'll pass through into a fuel strainer, right? So that also has a drain valve. The reservoir also has one here. And then, right, just like you said, it goes to the engine-driven fuel pump. Continuing on, we also have that fuel flow indicator, right, for gallons per hour. That's an electrical connection. So, yeah, that's pretty good. What kind of fuel does your airplane take?
So for us, it's 100 F-gas low lead.
Good. All right, sounds good. All right. How about let's talk a little bit about the engine on your airplane. What do you know about that?
Okay, let's see if I remember correctly. It's IO 360 L2A.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, great. So it is a Lycoming engine that's horizontally opposed, air-cooled, direct-driven, naturally aspirated, 4-cylinder, rated for 180 horsepower at 2,300 RPM or something.
Yeah, it's 180 horsepower, 27. Yeah, 2,700 RPM for the S model. And if you're flying 172R, it's 160 horsepower at 2,400 RPM. Good. So, yeah, you mentioned normally aspirated. What does that mean?
That means that the engine sucks in whatever it is in the atmosphere. Right. There's no turbocharge to boost up the air pressure.
There you go. That's exactly the answer there, right? So we should expect a decrease in performance of the engine as we get altitude. Good. All right. Let's see. Ignition system. Okay. Well, I won't ask you to explain the whole thing, but how about this? So I'm gonna presume that all of us know that we have magnetos. We have 2, right? So let's say we're doing our mag check. We switch it to the left mag. We do not see a drop in RPM. Explain to me what's going on and what you should do.
So you said left mag.
Yeah, let's say we move the key to the left mag and we do not see a drop in RPM.
So if I move the key to left mag, what's happening is it's grounding the right mag, right? It's the system supposed to ground the right mag.
Yeah.
And usually, if I'm only ignite from one side, that's a decrease in performance.
Right.
But we are not seeing that. Mm-hmm. That means the only reason is the right mag is not properly grounded. The right mag is still hot.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. What should you do then if you notice that?
Well, that means you have a hot mag that's failed to ground. That means even if you shut off the engines, you have a hot prop that could be going on. So that's I would say that's a no-go, and get the service ASAP.
Yeah, definitely a no-go. You want to try to let a mechanic know right away, or an airport manager, whatever it is, right? Try to tie the airplane down, put a cone in front of the prop, try to face it in a direction where people don't walk, stuff like that, to try to make it known that you do not want to be walking near that propeller, right? Good, okay. But yeah, the question I have here on the slide, talking about the ignition system, right? Just understanding that the mags are independent of the electrical system is another important thing, right? But we do need some sort of electricity, our battery, to engage the starter initially. But after that, no need for it. So all these questions here, relating to systems, not going to ask all of them, but you really just need to know your airplane. And to do that, section 7 in the POH is systems and all the description of the system. So read that. That's going to be pretty important to learn how your airplane works. All right, so last section here is all about the flight planning and national airspace system. So, we've talked about doing a weather briefing, which contains, checking all the weather reports and forecasts, looking at NOTAMs. What are some other required pre-flight actions? And even past that, what else do you personally do before flying?
Okay, so I will again go to the acronym of NW craft.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I do not remember the majority of that acronym.
That's all good.
But a lot of, the only note I know is no ATC briefing. That's not even VM.
Right, yeah. No ATC delays is not even something we worried about.
Right, so usually you want to, good rule of thumb is look at the fuel, look at the alternative airport in case you can reach your destination, and also the takeoff and landing performance of distance required, and whether the runway will support that.
Good. Yeah, you actually just hit all of that. That's all of it. Yeah. So NW craft is generally the acronym we can use for that, right? So besides what we've talked about, runway lengths of intended use, any alternative airports along the route, knowing your fuel requirements, right? Is daytime, right? Enough fuel to get to your first point of landing, plus another 30 minutes at normal cruise, and then nighttime would be 45, right? But also having personal minimums, and that's another good point here. Filling out a personal minimum sheet is going to be pretty important, and bringing that to your checkride, is you want to have these numbers, and realistically, you want to have these numbers too. As a new private pilot, you won't be going out and gusting 25 by yourself, or 1,200 feet ceilings, whatever that is, right? And the last thing, takeoff and landing distances. Is there anything else you personally do besides these, or is that just kind of it?
For me, I would say that's pretty much it. And again, for flight has a lot of. I'm not sure if TFR count towards NOTAMs.
Okay, yes, that's definitely important too. Yeah, TFRs. Mm-hmm. Essentially just be familiar with as much as you can beforehand. So I'll even, and since we've done this so many times together, right? Checking the weather beforehand. Can we anticipate a runway to land on? Can we anticipate a pattern entry or taxiway diagram? Take a look at that. You want to get ahead as much as you can beforehand, right? Writing down frequencies. I always, as I always write down my stuff on right beforehand. So that's always a good idea.
Hey Wesley, it's Mike D.
Hey, how's it going, Mike?
It's going okay. How about obstacles using your sectional or anything that may have just changed?
Yeah, that's also a good thing to bring up, right? So the regulation is pretty much be familiar with everything you possibly can. So that definitely counts. When you're doing your planning, making sure you're choosing checkpoints and altitudes, of course, that permit you to be above those obstacles. Yeah, it's a good thing to bring up. Awesome. All right. So, we planned perfect kind of leading into this, actually. We planned a cross-country flight. So what we're going to do is, you can kind of walk me through the checkpoints and the altitudes you chose on the nav block and kind of explain why you chose them. So instead of me opening up the nav block, I'll let you guys do that. I'm going to pull it up on SkyVector. Yes, we have all these storms and whatever here, but I've put all the checkpoints in, so we kind of just walk through it together. So here we are starting at Princeton, and just kind of tell me what you chose and the altitudes and all that.
Sure. So I mostly plotted a straight line.
Okay.
Direct towards the OXB, but there is from So I'm gonna move it in a non-linear way.
That's okay. Yeah, no problem.
Explain why I have
exactly. You do whatever you want to do. No problem.
Right. So the only non-straight line is Maypoint and Henlopen.
Okay.
And the reason why is you want to cut the time you spend over the water as little as possible. So you want to pick 2 points that are closest to each other. To land points basically, so that in case of an engine failure, you can get back to land and not have to force to ditch.
Okay, so let me stop you there, Ashley. So, how much distance is in between those 2 points, and based on the altitude you've chosen, can you make it back to land?
Yes. So I remember it's around 9 miles.
Okay.
Between those two, and we are planning to do 66,500. And if we pull up to POH,
that's right. Yeah, let me see if I can find that. That's right.
Section 3.
I guess it's not letting me search too big. You're right. Yeah, Section 3. Those amplified emergency procedures. Yeah, what are you looking for in there as I try to find it?
For the altitude versus glide distance at fast glide speed.
All right. Well, it looks like it's not letting me. Kind of. Too slow, but anyways, all right, yeah, you're correct. There's a chart in that section of the POH that basically will, altitude versus the glide distance. So yeah, using that, you want to have that tab in your POH, and if you see that your route's going to be over water, know if you can make it back to land. Also understand the minimum altitude, it's halfway, right? Because you can always make a 180. That's something people kind of don't think about too often, but good, okay. Good explanation there. So I'll take you back to Sky Vector.
Yep. So the rest of them is just you plot a straight line, direct, and you see, and you find out your top of climb, and you see what's going on, and you make a note of that. Mm-hmm. So I think most of them are just are self-explanatory. We have cities, we have VFR checkpoint with that little flags on the sectionals.
Yeah, right over here.
Those are very good selections of visual checkpoints. And most of all, so for the final few legs, we are basically flying along the coastline.
Okay.
So that is nature an excellent way to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'd say pretty hard to get lost during this portion, right? So okay, yeah. Good. All right. So yeah, this is all all pilotage. We're in tracking any VORs here. Is just things are easy to see, right? So we had our top of climb here kind of lined up actually with this visual checkpoint of this very easy to see bend in the river. Then we had next to Flying W, perfectly right over here, Hamilton, right? That's a good checkpoint, the town and the airport. We were next to Millville, which we also have that huge lake there. And then from there, just as you said, we are going from Cape May to Cape Henlopen to minimize the distance over water. And yeah, we're just kind of tracking the shoreline down afterwards. Good. So you chose 6,500 feet, right? Why 6,500? We talked about the water already, but what else?
Yes. So even though it's mostly a south route, it's slightly on the west end. And the VFR, the traffic pattern, not traffic, but the cruise altitude is west. You go even thousands plus 500.
Good. Yeah, that neon sweeping thing, right? So if you're directly south or anywhere west, right? So 180 to 359 magnetic course. Yeah, it's got to be even thousands plus 500 if you're choosing to fly above 3,000 AGL. Okay, good. So looking at this here, if we're at 6,500 feet, it looks like we're going to be inside of this airspace. Do you see this kind of blue outline here?
Yes. So
what kind of airspace is in that, and what would we need to do before getting into it?
Okay, so this is a class Bravo airspace, usually for the busiest airport. And you need explicit ATC clearance, clear for the Bravo before entering the airspace.
Good. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing. It's Bravo. You need a clearance, right? That's unlike any of the other ones, right? So we need an explicit clearance. Okay. Anything else we need to get in for Bravo?
You mean equipment-wise?
Yeah, equipment-wise. How about that?
Okay. So equipment-wise, you need a two-way radio. You need a mode C transponder, I think.
Right.
And you also need a VOR if you're flying instrument.
Yeah. So the main thing would be the mode C transponder, and nowadays for us also the ADS-B out, right? So that's the equipment requirement. Yeah, as long as you understand the Bravo is going to need that explicit clearance, that'll be good. So, okay, we're also going through this big red area here, this A220. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right, what's that? What's that all about?
A220, A stands for alert area, and basically it's military stuff going on. You can go without ATC clearance at your own cost. Be diligent, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So alert area, right? High volume of pilot training we often see, but yeah, right. These are surrounding McGuire and Lakehurst, so you're gonna have a lot of those military aircraft flying around. And you're right, we do not need a clearance to get into an alert area, but you should still exercise caution. Hopefully you're on flight following, but yeah, right. Hopefully for this flight, we have to be already talking to the controller, right, for the Bravo. So yeah, be familiar with all those different special use airspaces and understand. Look, if you look at the bottom of your sectional chart, you can find when they're going to be active, who to contact if you need to talk to someone to determine if it's hot or cold. That's pretty important. And same thing, we brought up the Bravo, know all the different airspaces, all the controlled airspaces, right? Bravo, we have Charlie around Atlantic City. We even have Echo from the surface here from Millville. We have a bunch of Deltas. Know what those look like, know about them, operational equipment requirements, all those different things, right? All right, awesome. But essentially, some other things we didn't talk about with Navlog, right? Be able to demonstrate how you calculated each item on there. Know exactly, how did I get this heading? How did I get this fuel number, ground speed, and all that? All right. Skip that. We've just kind of been talking about that stuff. We talked about the alert area. We talked about the class Bravo. All right, this is a good one, actually. So, let's say we're between Millville and Cape May. We're kind of passing this VOR, Sea Isle VOR, right? We have this frequency written on top, 122.1 with an R there. So how would we contact FSS, Flight Service Station, over the Sea Isle VOR?
All right, so 122.1 R, that means that is the frequency for receive only. And you transmit on 122.1, the flight service station will hear it. Mm-hmm. But when they talk back, you should monitor the CIOVOR frequency,
right?
114.8.
That's exactly right. And do you know what flight service station we can reach there?
So it's called Millville.
There you go.
Millville Radio.
Awesome. Yeah, Millville Radio. That's exactly right. That's how you would address them there. So yeah, good explanation, right? The R for receive capability only, right? If it didn't have the R, right, we would just use that frequency. But yeah, just because we have that R, right, they cannot talk to us back on that. Very good. Another important frequency, 121.5. What's that called?
That's usually the emergency frequency or the guard frequency.
Guard, that's right. All right. Now, not sometimes, it's a good idea to monitor that if you have a second radio. So what if you're monitoring that and you hear like this faint sound? It sounds like beeping and a pause kind of going back and forth. What's going on?
So that's usually indicated an EOT has gone up.
Okay.
And grab the ATC. Hopefully you have flight following. You can grab the ATC and report that that case.
Yeah, that's right. You hear an ELT, a weak ELT, but yeah, you would let the approach controller know, or whoever you're talking to know, and that way they can reach out to search and rescue to see who has that strongest signal and then dispatch accordingly. So good. Okay. All right. Now we have another scenario-based question here. How are we doing on time? Okay. Let's say we're on the route right now, but for the last couple minutes, the frequency for McGuire has just been totally silent and you're worried you have a radio failure. So talk to me about how you would diagnose this issue before kind of just squawking 7600 and whatever.
Okay, so first of all, just call them. Talk to them, radio check is, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. If they couldn't hear you, check your radios. Maybe sometimes I think, okay, somebody's talking too loud, I turn the volume down a bit. Maybe I turn down too much. I think it's dead silent. And check nearby frequencies, right? Move on to other, maybe there's ASOS, ATIS stuff on the way there. Go through their frequency, see if you can pick up anything. And also possibility of try the second radio.
Mm-hmm.
And if all those debug has failed, and you believe you are operating the radio correctly, and then I think it's wise to hop in the 7600.
All right, that's a pretty solid answer there. I like what you told me. So yeah, there's a lot of things you want to do beforehand. So checking your audio panel, you just talked about volume, right? Which radio do you have selected? Maybe you have the wrong one selected and you're trying to transmit on that, right? You said try radio check would be good. You can always go back to the previous frequency you were talking on and try and check there or go to another frequency. Yeah, you said try a different radio. That'll be good. You can also try recycling your avionics master switch, right? You can turn that on and off, or even each radio off and on individually. But yeah, if still nothing, right, I would squawk 7600 and then go somewhere else and land. All right, we talked about the water already. There's that chart as well, right, in your POH that you're going to see. So at like 6,500 feet, we can glide, what is that? What, 9 to 10 miles, which is plenty enough since it's only, 9 to 10 miles the whole way, right? All right, what are airport hotspots and why are those important to understand?
So airport hotspot, that is a sort of experience things that a lot of runway incursions or pilot deviations have occurred at the spot. Yeah, maybe because they are an intersection between a taxiway and runway, or multiple taxiway, multiple runways, and pilots are prone to make mistakes at those areas. So they mark it out that you should be careful or use extra vigilance when approaching those areas.
Yeah, it's good explanation there, right? And yeah, they're marked on your airport diagrams. Just we see here those brown circles, and they're labeled HS1, HS2. Not a lot of people know, but you can also actually look up these hotspots in your chart supplement, right? There's very few pages, but it'll break it down by state and then airport, and it'll describe each hotspot in detail. Why is it confusing here, and what should you do? So it's pretty important. So I would say know where to find those pages in your paper or digital chart supplement, whatever you're using. All right, and let's say we're doing this flight at nighttime instead. How would you activate the pilot-controlled lights at Princeton?
Okay, so you go into the chart supplement and find out the light frequency. And you tune that to frequency and key the radio. Not sure what to do. Key it, I think it's 7 times for high intensity.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think Princeton only have medium intensity, right. So 7 times fine, but 5 times also works.
Yeah, all right. It's good explanation there. Exactly right. So one of the important things to also understand is the frequency for your lights is not always the CTAF. And yeah, Princeton's a good example of that, right? 123.05 is what you're going to find in the chart supplement for your lights rather than activating on the CTAF. Good. All right. What colors are the beacon at a public versus military airport?
Okay, public airport, I think it's white and green. Rotating beacon. Mm-hmm. Military airport, I think it's 2 white and a green.
Yeah, you'll see kind of 2 white flashes and 90 green. That's right. So that's pretty important at nighttime to see. All right, and then I'm obviously not going to ask all these additional questions for flight planning and airspace, but understand the concept of VORs. That's always an area that we'll spend time on. Loss procedures, right of way. What if you're cruising and you see an airport beacon on in the daytime? What is that telling you? Fuel requirements. What else do I have here? Know about runway incursions. Other sectional markings we talked about earlier. Mike was mentioning obstacles, right? Also, those big blue numbers in each quadrant. What do the tick marks on these airport symbols indicate, right? Here, like at Woodbine, they have fuel, right? Passenger safety briefing. That's something that sometimes is overlooked, but you legally have to give a passenger safety briefing, and you want to know that safety acronym pretty well there. But that's the end of all the questions. So you did a pretty solid job. You almost everything there. So just a couple last second things here to help you guys out when you're preparing. But these 4 things are probably the most useful documents when you're preparing. So we talked about the ACS. We talked about your POH, and I'm not saying read this cover to cover and memorize everything. Systems is definitely something you want to have a pretty good understanding on. Weight and balance, be able to do that. Know how to use all the performance charts and tables in section 5. Know your emergency procedures, right? Know some of those limitations as well. FAR aim, same thing. You're not reading that, not reading regulations front of cover. There's no sense in that. But there's like a suggested study guide list for each rating in the front. So use that and just kind of focus on those specific sections and tab them up if you don't know them too well. Everything's tied together though with this blue book, that Private Pilot Oral Exam Guide. So that kind of has a lot of good questions in it. Not everything, but some pretty good questions. So use that. Some other things here. Only answer what's being asked. So if he's asking you, let me think of a question here. What are the currency requirements as a private pilot? I'm just going to answer a flight review and nothing else. I don't have to explain anything else unless he's going to ask me for anything else. You don't have to have every single regulation memorized. We went through a bunch of different things, and some of them are a little confusing. So it's okay to occasionally pull out those reference materials in your POH or checklist or FAR aim, but you want to know where those things are. And we talked about that. Okay. Written exam, right? You would have to review those missed questions with your instructor beforehand. Expect the DP to spend more time on those concepts and know those concepts pretty well. But I say the biggest thing is come prepared and organized, because if you make the examiner's life easy from the beginning, it's going to be a very easy check ride. Tab your logbook, your personal logbook. Where did I do my nighttime? Where is my long solo cross country? Have that all tabbed. And same thing with the airplane logbooks. Show him easily. This is where the annual is done. This is when it's been due. And if you really even want, type up a sheet with your totals that he knows you've got it all done with, and even dates for each thing. Type up the inspections. Whatever you want to do, just come prepared and organized for him, and it's going to be no problem afterwards. But all right, that's all I have for you guys. So if we can open it up for additional questions here, but I gotta say you've been did a pretty solid job there. I'd say you would definitely pass that one, no problem. Right? Did a good job.
Nice job, Euban.
Thanks. All right. Let's see. Let me open up that chat. Michael says, excellent job. Is that Michael Colley?
Yes, sir.
All right. How's it going?
Doing well. Excellent job. I loved it.
All right. Glad to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very well done. Excellent.
Thank you very much for tuning in.
Yeah.
No, AG's here. How's it going, AG? AG got his private pilot license 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yep.
No questions, nothing at all.
Cool. This is a really great resource to have, and I would recommend people that are going to do their check rides. It's really nice to listen to an oral exam, while you're driving, or if you're just off. I used to play them sometimes as I would prepare. So this was a really great sample oral to listen back to.
Yeah, definitely.
Before we do wrap up, if anyone has any other suggestions or questions for another webinar for the following month, let us know. You can always email us or stop in the office and just step by and say something that would be helpful for you as a pilot. We're always looking for new ideas. And Wesley, thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah, I'm always happy to do it. Thank you, Euban, for doing this as well, giving us our time. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks, Euban. That was brave of you.
I know. I mean, you probably knew pretty much everything, so it's pretty good.
Excellent work.
Great.
All right.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen tonight.
All right. We'll see you guys flying soon.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Great resource. Thank you.
Nice, guys.
Thank you.
You
Bye,
got it.
everyone.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Be out.